Long before European ships creaked into view along the Atlantic coast, the native peoples of North America were living in ways that might seem strange, even unbelievable, to modern ears. Some tribes used fish as fertilizer, burying them beneath corn to nourish the soil. Others chewed spruce tree gum, not just as a snack, but as the original chewing gum. The Mandan people constructed earth lodges so well insulated that they could bake bread even in sub-zero winters without a fire. And the Inuit of the Arctic used frozen fish as knives, crafting tools from the very environment that tried to kill them. In the Southwest, tribes like the Hopi built villages on the edges of cliffs, not for safety, but to be closer to the sky, where spirits moved in the wind. These weren't primitive curiosities. They were sophisticated adaptations to the land, showing an astonishing variety of culture, tradition, and survival long before a single boot stepped off a European ship. The land was not empty. It pulsed with life and knowledge. From the frozen tundra of the far north to the humid forests of the southeast, hundreds of distinct tribes flourished, each with their own unique way of life. The Iroquois Confederacy, made up of 5 and later 6 nations, had a democratic system where women held significant power, including the authority to choose chiefs. Farther west, the plains tribes like the Lakota and Blackfeet followed the great bison herds, depending on every part of the animal for food, clothing, tools, and even glue. Along the Pacific coast, the Haida carved enormous totem poles and held elaborate potlatch ceremonies where wealth was shown not by how much you owned, but by how much you gave away. Life before European contact was not a golden utopia, but it was deeply rooted in balance, with nature, with community, and with the unseen world. Many tribes viewed time as a circle, not a straight line, and seasons were considered sacred markers in an eternal cycle. Stories, passed through generations in long oral traditions, were used to teach values, history, and memory. These were not bedtime stories. They were living instruction manuals, and forgetting them meant forgetting how to live. In some tribes, children learned through games that doubled as spiritual teachings. Among the Zuni, for instance, dolls were not mere toys, but representations of kachinas, powerful spirits meant to guide and protect. Across the continent, ingenious methods of survival were everywhere. In the deserts of the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built complex irrigation systems that moved water across miles of dry land to grow crops. On the Great Plains, native peoples used controlled burns to shape the environment, promoting grasslands for game animals and reducing wildfire risk. Centuries before modern science would discover the value of prescribed burns. And in the dense forests of the Northeast, birch bark canoes were built so light that a man could lift one onto his shoulders, yet strong enough to carry entire families across wide lakes. Despite these advanced adaptations, life could be harsh. Winters were brutal. Crops sometimes failed. Intertribal conflict, often ritualized and limited in scope, was still a part of life, but hardship was met with community. Most tribes did not leave their sick or elderly behind. They were honored and cared for, repositories of memory and experience. Elders knew the stars, the plants, and the old songs. They were libraries in human form. Strangely, even death was not always feared in the way modern societies fear it. Among many plains tribes, death in battle was considered honorable, but so was dying quietly, with dignity, surrounded by kin. Some believed that the spirit would walk the Milky Way to reach the afterlife, Others buried their dead in trees to bring them closer to the sky. Still others practiced sky burials, letting nature reclaim the body in its own time. Life and death were not opposites, but part of the same sacred circle. And then there were the dreams. Many native cultures placed enormous significance on dreams, seeing them as messages from ancestors or glimpses into other realms. Vision quests, often involving solitude and fasting, were rites of passage into adulthood, helping young people discover their purpose or spirit guide. Imagine a teenager today being sent alone into the wilderness to wait for a vision. To the people of the time, this wasn't extreme. It was essential. So when the sails finally appeared on the horizon, and pale-faced strangers stepped off creaking wooden ships with iron tools and foreign gods, they were not stepping into a void. They were stepping into a world already full of meaning, knowledge, and life. Strange, perhaps, to outsiders, but sacred and essential to those who lived it. When the first European sails appeared on the horizon, Native Americans didn't run in fear. They watched with curiosity. To many coastal tribes, the sight of a ship was so unusual that some believed it was a floating island, or even a sea creature. Some Algonquin tribes thought the white sails resembled giant birds, and the Europeans who stepped ashore were just as baffling. Pale-skinned, heavily clothed, and carrying strange objects like compasses, metal pots, and firearms, they looked more like spirits from a dream than human beings. For many native peoples, these first encounters were not immediately hostile, but they were confusing. Worlds were about to collide, and no one understood just how vast the gap truly was. At first, these meetings were marked by wonder, cautious friendliness, and mutual curiosity. Trade quickly became the universal language. Beads of glass, iron knives, and copper kettles were exchanged for animal pelts, corn, and tobacco. One of the strangest early trades was for wampum, beads made from polished shells, which were sacred and symbolic in many native cultures, but treated by the Europeans as simple currency. In time, wampum would become a kind of international trade medium, even though its deeper meaning was often completely lost on those using it. There were other odd gifts too. Feathers, dyed porcupine quills, animal bones shaped into tools or jewelry. A single axe head, to some, was worth more than gold. But even early trade brought problems. Many Europeans, especially the English, misunderstood the spiritual relationship native people had with land and resources. To European minds, land could be bought and sold. But to most native cultures, land was not a commodity. It was alive, communal, and sacred. So when the Dutch purchased Manhattan in 1626 for trinkets worth about $24, the native people likely believed they were sharing land, not giving it away permanently. These misunderstandings laid the groundwork for centuries of conflict, as Europeans assumed ownership where none had truly been granted. Another strange and tragic result of early contact was invisible: disease. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and typhus swept through native communities at terrifying speed. These diseases, carried unknowingly by Europeans, were often more devastating than any weapon. Entire villages were wiped out before they even saw a white face. In some regions, like coastal New England, up to 90% of the native population died within a few short decades. To the survivors, these plagues were inexplicable. Some believed they were punishments from the spirits. Others thought the Europeans had brought dark magic. And in truth, it did seem like something supernatural. How else could entire generations vanish so fast? Even language became a battlefield of misunderstanding. Many native languages had no direct equivalent for king, god, or ownership, which made discussions about religion and territory especially difficult. Europeans brought missionaries with them, who often saw native religions as superstition. In contrast, native spiritual practices, like dances, vision quests, and offerings to nature, were deeply ingrained and meaningful. When Jesuit priests asked why some Iroquois refused to convert, the reply was simple: "Your heaven sounds boring." Yet not all interactions were dark. For a time, there were genuine moments of cooperation. Squanto, a member of the Patuxet tribe who had been kidnapped and taken to Europe years earlier, returned to help the Pilgrims survive their first winter in what became Plymouth. He showed them how to plant corn with fish, how to find edible plants, and how to navigate the unfamiliar land. Some tribes forged temporary alliances with colonial powers to gain advantages over rival tribes. But even these relationships were fragile, often built on shifting sands of need, mistrust, and cultural gaps. One lesser-known early conflict began over a pig. In Virginia, in the early 1600s, a pig wandered into native farmland and destroyed crops. To the English, it was a simple accident. To the Powhatan, it was an act of aggression. The event sparked a dispute that would escalate into violence, revealing just how fragile peace really was. At the heart of these first contacts was a tragic irony. Both sides thought they understood each other, but they didn't. Europeans believed they were bringing civilization. Native peoples believed they were meeting new trading partners, but both sides had different concepts of land, value, time, and even what it meant to live a good life. That gap, invisible at first, would widen until it tore across the continent like a fault line. In the beginning, it wasn't war that defined the relationship. It was confusion, misunderstanding, a hopeful, awkward attempt to bridge two worlds that were not just separated by an ocean, but by completely different ways of seeing the world. The first ships brought curiosity. The next wave brought settlers, and they didn't come to trade. They came to stay. With each passing season, more Europeans arrived. The English, the Dutch, the French, and later the Spanish and the Portuguese. They carried with them not only their tools and their God, but their families, their fences, and most of all, their assumptions. They believed the land was empty, that it was theirs for the taking, and that civilization meant towns, farms, and private property. For Native Americans, this marked the beginning of something they could scarcely understand at first. A quiet invasion that would soon grow loud, violent, and impossible to ignore. At first, colonists tried to make peace. They offered gifts, held ceremonies, and signed treaties, many of which were never fully explained, translated, or honored. But as settlements grew, the pressure on native land became impossible to overlook. Fields of corn were replaced by wheat. Forests were cut down for timber. Fences, strange wooden barriers, were hammered into the earth, alien symbols of ownership in a world where land had always been shared. One native leader reportedly said, "You fence the land like it's a cow." In many ways, the settlers misunderstood what they were doing. When they built homes, they thought they were building safety and prosperity. But for many native peoples, these houses weren't homes. They were permanent scars on sacred ground. Graves were disturbed, hunting trails blocked, and fishing spots claimed. It was more than just displacement. It was spiritual desecration. One strange, almost surreal moment came when Puritan settlers tried to civilize local tribes by teaching them to build fences and wear shoes, completely unaware that these were symbols of control, not progress. By the mid-1600s, tensions were simmering. Colonists kept expanding. Native peoples, now weakened by disease and struggling to maintain their traditional food sources, began to resist. Some fought with diplomacy. Others prepared for war. In 1675, King Philip's War broke out in New England. A brutal conflict named after the Wampanoag leader, Metacom, whom the English called King Philip. Entire villages were burned, crops destroyed. Thousands died on both sides, but the native losses were heavier. A strange and tragic fact. Metacom's head was placed on a spike and displayed in Plymouth for over 2 decades as a warning. Meanwhile, further south, in what would become Virginia and the Carolinas, conflict grew around tobacco. The English settlers' hunger for land was driven in large part by this single plant, tobacco, a crop originally cultivated by Native Americans. As demand for it grew in Europe, colonists began seizing more territory to grow it, pushing tribes from their ancestral lands. And so, ironically, a plant sacred to many tribes became a reason for their expulsion. Another strange moment occurred in 1622, when the Powhatan Confederacy launched a surprise attack on English settlers in Virginia. Over 300 colonists were killed, and the English were shocked. But from the native perspective, it was retaliation. After years of being pushed off their land, the English called it a massacre. The Powhatan called it a defense. This pattern, attack, retaliation, misunderstanding, would repeat over and over across every corner of the continent. As colonists continued to pour in, alliances became complex. Some tribes allied with European powers to gain advantage over rival nations. The Hurons sided with the French, the Iroquois with the English. In these early conflicts, native peoples were not passive victims. They were skilled diplomats, warriors, and strategists. But no matter how clever the alliances, the outcome remained the same. Native land continued to shrink. Some tribes tried to adapt. They adopted European clothing, converted to Christianity, and began farming in the settler style, hoping that assimilation would mean survival. But even those who conformed were often pushed aside. In one haunting example, the Pequot tribe was almost entirely wiped out in 1637 during a single nighttime massacre in Connecticut. Over 700 men, women, and children were killed in their village while they slept. The settlers described it as a necessary act of war. To the survivors, it was a nightmare that would echo for generations. By the end of the 17th century, the tone had shifted completely. The age of curiosity was over. What followed was the age of conquest. The settlers had gone from guests to landlords, and then to rulers. Maps were redrawn, lands renamed. The forests, once full of song and ceremony, now echoed with axes and musket fire. Even the animals felt it. Beavers were hunted nearly to extinction for their pelts, and buffalo began disappearing from eastern prairies. It had started with a handshake. Now it was a fist. The world was changing, and Native Americans, once the sovereign stewards of the continent, found themselves pushed to the margins of their own homelands. This was not yet the end, but it was the end of the beginning. It might be hard to imagine, but there was a time when people were ordered to walk hundreds of miles, not as a pilgrimage or a journey of faith, but because their very homes were no longer considered theirs, and they walked without shoes across frozen ground, through rivers swollen with winter melt, their breath visible in the cold. Children sometimes carried their grandparents. Others carried small bags of earth from their homeland, afraid that the land itself would forget them. This was the Trail of Tears. Not just one trail, but a series of forced marches that scattered entire nations across unfamiliar territory, erasing centuries of rooted life in the span of a few seasons. One of the strangest parts of this tragic chapter is how it began, with law, paperwork, and the language of civilization. In the early 1800s, the Cherokee Nation had a written constitution. They had schools, a newspaper printed in both English and Cherokee, and even a Supreme Court. The Cherokee language itself had a syllabary, a written script invented by a man named Sequoyah, a blacksmith with no formal education. Some Cherokee even owned plantations and enslaved African Americans, hoping that adopting American systems would protect them. But none of it mattered. In the eyes of the U.S. government, they were still in the way. The pressure came from land. White settlers, driven by dreams of cotton wealth, wanted the fertile ground of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee, land long held by the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole peoples. President Andrew Jackson, a war hero who had once fought against native tribes, signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830. It passed by only a handful of votes. That one decision sealed the fate of over 60,000 native men, women, and children. Some resisted. The Seminoles in Florida fought for years in thick swamps, launching guerrilla attacks and refusing to go quietly. Others, like the Cherokee, took a different route. They went to court. In 1832, in Worcester versus Georgia, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign entity, and that Georgia had no right to enforce laws on its territory. It should have been a victory. But President Jackson famously ignored the ruling, reportedly saying, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." And so the removal began. The Choctaw were the first to be marched west. Their journey in the winter of 1831 was marked by hunger, disease, and death. One witness described people walking with frostbitten feet that left bloody prints in the snow. The government provided little food, no medical care, and few wagons. One Choctaw leader called it a trail of tears and death. The name stuck. The Cherokee removal was the most well documented. In 1838, U.S. soldiers rounded up the Cherokee at gunpoint, herding them into stockades like cattle. Families were separated, homes were looted, sacred items were lost or destroyed. Around 16,000 Cherokee began the journey west, walking over 1,000 miles to what is now Oklahoma. They crossed icy rivers, climbed mountains, and trudged through mud, many wearing only the clothes they had on when they were taken. Here's a fact that rarely makes it into textbooks. Some of the Cherokee died from sheer exhaustion, falling asleep in the snow and never waking up. Others drowned while crossing rivers with no bridges. At least 4,000, 1 in 4, died along the way. Elders, infants, pregnant women, the sick. The journey was so deadly that missionaries and even some soldiers wept at what they saw. In one camp, a U.S. officer reportedly said, "No pen can describe the scenes of suffering." And yet, in the midst of this horror, there were quiet acts of resilience. Some people carried bundles of herbs from their homeland, planting them in Oklahoma soil. Others told stories at night around meager fires, passing down songs so they wouldn't be forgotten. A few even kept journals, documenting each day of the journey, page after page of sorrow and survival. One woman, before leaving, sowed seeds into the hems of her children's clothes: corn, beans, squash. The three sisters, a garden of memory. The Trail of Tears wasn't a single road. It was many paths, each filled with suffering. The Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole, the Choctaw, the Cherokee. They walked different routes, but carried the same burden: the loss of home. What began as treaties and handshakes ended in cold mud and silent graves. To fall asleep to this story is not to forget it. It is to rest, knowing that even in the face of brutal injustice, people still sang, still remembered, and still walked forward, step by painful step, into a new land where nothing felt like home. It's a strange thing to think about, but some of the fiercest battles in American history were fought not for glory nor conquest, but simply for survival. In the second half of the 1800s, as settlers flooded westward and railroads carved lines through prairie and mountain, Native nations faced a grim reality. Their land was vanishing. Treaties, often signed under pressure or deception, were being torn up like scraps of paper. Buffalo herds were being slaughtered not for food, but to break the native economy. And so, across the Great Plains and desert Southwest, native warriors took up their bows, rifles, and courage, knowing full well the odds were against them. What many people don't realize is that the Indian Wars weren't a single conflict, but a series of them, stretching from the 1850s to the 1890s, covering vast regions from Montana to Texas. Each had its own causes, its own heroes, and its own tragedies. The Sioux, Cheyenne, Apache, Comanche, Nez Perce, and many more found themselves in a repeating cycle. A treaty is signed, settlers move in anyway, resources are taken, resistance begins, and then comes retribution, often brutal and overwhelming. One of the strangest examples of this came with the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. It granted the Lakota Sioux ownership of the Black Hills, a sacred mountain range in what is now South Dakota. But just 6 years later, gold was discovered there. Miners flooded in. The U.S. government tried to buy the land, but the Lakota refused. Their leader, Sitting Bull, said, "We do not want your civilization." He was a medicine man, not a war chief, but his defiance would soon make him famous. The U.S. Army responded with force. What followed was the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, one of the few native victories. There, in a valley by the river known as the Greasy Grass, Sioux and Cheyenne warriors led by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull defeated General George Custer's troops. Custer and over 200 men died. For a brief moment, it felt like justice. But the victory brought more soldiers, more war, and more destruction. There were other strange, haunting episodes. In 1877, the Nez Perce tribe, led by Chief Joseph, tried to flee to Canada rather than surrender their ancestral homeland in Oregon. For over 1,000 miles, they evaded U.S. forces, marching through mountains and snow, protecting women and children along the way. It was one of the most remarkable retreats in military history. When they were finally surrounded, Chief Joseph made his famous speech, "I will fight no more forever." His people were promised safe return to their lands, but were instead exiled to Kansas, Meanwhile, the Apache resistance in the Southwest was becoming legendary. Warriors like Geronimo evaded capture again and again, using knowledge of the desert to outwit U.S. troops. They vanished into canyons, appeared at night, and traveled light. Some soldiers believed they had magical powers. One bizarre rumor claimed that Apache warriors could walk without leaving tracks or turn into animals. In truth, they were simply skilled, determined, and desperate. And all the while, treaties continued to be broken. Reservations, the supposed safe zones for native peoples, were constantly reduced in size. Promises of food, blankets, and tools often never arrived. Corruption ran deep. Indian agents stole supplies. Children went hungry. Entire communities were demoralized. Some leaders tried peaceful resistance, signing agreement after agreement in hopes of peace. Others chose to fight, knowing it might mean extinction. Perhaps the strangest and most heartbreaking moment came in 1890 at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. There, a new spiritual movement had taken hold among Native nations, the ghost dance. Its believers said that by dancing, praying, and wearing sacred shirts, they could bring back the buffalo and make the white men disappear. It was a desperate hope, born of trauma and loss. But the U.S. government saw it as rebellion. When troops surrounded a group of Lakota performing the dance, a shot was fired. Nobody knows by whom. What followed was a massacre. Over 250 Native men, women, and children were killed. Some were shot as they fled into the snow. Bodies were left to freeze. The Indian Wars ended not with a treaty, but with silence. There was no grand ceremony, no peace agreement, just graves, ruins, and the distant whistle of a train. The wars were over. The land was lost. And yet, the spirit remained. In whispered songs, in sacred places, in names carried like embers across generations. Tonight, as you fall asleep, imagine a fire burning low on a cold plain. Around it, a circle of people sit, quiet. Their stories passed from voice to voice. Warriors, healers, elders. They are not forgotten. They are still here. It might sound like something from a dystopian novel, but there was a time in American history when thousands of children were taken from their families, given new names, forbidden to speak their own language, and taught to forget who they were. It didn't happen in secret prisons or under cover of war. It happened in schools. Some of these children were as young as 5 years old. They were told they were being saved, but in truth, they were being erased. These institutions were called Indian boarding schools, and although they sound like places of education, their real purpose was assimilation. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. That's what Captain Richard Henry Pratt said when he founded the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1879, one of the most well-known and earliest examples. The idea was not to educate native children to succeed in the world, but to strip them of their culture so they could disappear into white society. One of the strangest things about these schools is how quickly the transformation was forced. When children arrived, their hair was cut, sometimes all at once, sometimes in chunks. For many native cultures, hair held deep spiritual meaning. Cutting it was like cutting away the soul. Boys were dressed in itchy military uniforms. Girls were put in stiff dresses. They were assigned English names, their own names, names that honored rivers, stars, animals, or ancestors, were erased from the roll books. Punishments were swift and cruel. If a child spoke their native language, they were beaten, locked in solitary confinement, or had their mouths washed out with lye. At some schools, children were made to stand still for hours with soap in their mouths. Others were strapped to chairs. In one eerie case, children at a school in Pennsylvania were locked in a basement called the dungeon for disobedience. Their only crime, trying to sing in their mother tongue. But the cruelty wasn't just physical. It was emotional and cultural. Children were taught that their parents were savages, that their customs were evil, and that their gods were false. Traditional dances, stories, and clothing were mocked. Many children stopped speaking entirely. Not in English, not in their own language, just silence. Teachers wrote home to parents complaining that students were slow or rebellious, never once realizing that they were dealing with trauma, confusion, and heartbreak. Strangely, many of these schools were located hundreds or even thousands of miles from tribal lands. One girl from the Hopi Nation in Arizona was sent all the way to New York. Boys from Alaska were taken to Nebraska. The idea was to break the connection to home. Letters were censored. Visits were rare. The few children who managed to escape and walk home, some traveling hundreds of miles on foot, were often brought back by force. Diseases swept through the dormitories. Tuberculosis, measles, malnutrition. Some children died within weeks of arrival. Many were buried on school grounds in unmarked graves. Today, archaeologists and tribal historians are still uncovering these burial sites. One recent discovery near a school in Canada revealed over 200 child-sized graves beneath what is now a grassy field. Some had no names, just numbers. And yet, in the middle of this darkness, children found ways to resist. Some whispered their language under blankets at night. Others carved secret symbols into bedposts, preserving stories in scratched wood. A few formed quiet alliances, older students protecting the younger ones. One boy kept a tiny pouch of earth from his homeland hidden in his boot, pressing it when he felt afraid. A small rebellion, a silent strength. Some native parents, heartbroken by what was happening, refused to send their children. Others were threatened with jail or the loss of government rations. The pressure was immense. To survive, families had to choose between keeping their children close and protecting them from harm. A choice no parent should ever have to make. By the early 20th century, there were over 350 of these boarding schools across the US and Canada. Many operated until the 1970s. That's not ancient history. It's living memory. Some of the children who went through these schools are still alive today. They remember the cold beds, the prayers in a foreign tongue, the hunger, the punishments, and the deep ache of being told that everything about them was wrong. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine those children, small figures walking through snow, looking back one last time at a home they were told to forget. But they didn't forget. The songs, the languages, the ceremonies, many were preserved quietly in whispers and memories. The boarding schools tried to erase identity, but they didn't succeed. Because even in silence, a name remembers itself. A song hums in the blood, and a child, even far from home, still dreams in the language of the ancestors. It's hard to believe, but much of what was taken from Native Americans wasn't stolen with swords or rifles, but with paper. Pens, ink, ledgers, and courtrooms replaced the battlefield. Whole nations were uprooted, not by armies, but by loopholes, legislation, and quiet signatures in government offices. This is the strange story of how land, the earth beneath people's feet, was lost again and again in ways that were perfectly legal and completely unjust. One of the strangest facts about Native American land loss is this. In the late 1800s, Native tribes legally owned over 150 million acres across the United States. But just a few decades later, that number had dropped to less than 50 million. How? Not by war, but through something called allotment. The idea was simple and devastating. In 1887, Congress passed the Dawes Act, named after Senator Henry Dawes of Massachusetts. The law claimed it would help Native Americans by making them farmers and landowners, just like white Americans. On the surface, it sounded fair. Each Native person would be given a small parcel of land, usually about 160 acres. But here's the twist. Any land left over after that would be declared surplus and sold to non-native settlers. The result? Over 90 million acres of native land were quietly handed over to white farmers, railroads, and speculators. That's about the size of Montana and California combined. Whole reservations were chopped up into pieces like slices of pie. And because many native people didn't have the legal tools or understanding to navigate deeds, taxes, or paperwork, they lost even the small parcels they were given. Even stranger, the lands were often held in trust by the federal government. This meant that native people didn't actually own the land outright. They couldn't sell it, lease it, or use it as collateral. They were landowners in name only. And while the government promised to protect this trust, it also routinely mismanaged it. In fact, for over a century, billions of dollars from native land leases, especially oil and mineral rights, went missing. It wasn't until a class action lawsuit in the 1990s that the federal government finally admitted its failure. This legal tangle created a strange and painful irony. Many native families lived on land rich with oil, gas, or timber, and remained in poverty because the government failed to give them what was owed. In some places, tribes had to sue just to see the balance sheets for their own land. As one tribal leader once said, "We are the landlords, but we never see the rent." But the legal erosion didn't stop there. Some tribes were terminated altogether. In the 1950s, a new federal policy sought to end the special relationship between tribes and the government. Over 100 tribes were officially terminated, losing their legal status, their sovereignty, and their land base. Their lands were sold off or handed over to state governments. Many tribal members were relocated to urban areas, far from their homelands, promised new jobs and opportunities that rarely came. In this era, a quiet and heartbreaking phenomenon occurred: checkerboarding. Because land was divided and sold off over generations, many reservations today resemble a checkerboard, small pockets of tribal land mixed in with private and federal land. This made everything from housing to economic development incredibly difficult. A tribe might own a school building, but not the road to reach it. A family might live on ancestral land, but their neighbors might be cattle ranchers with entirely different rights. It created a patchwork of confusion that still affects many reservations to this day. And then, there's the strange legal doctrine known as the doctrine of discovery, a centuries-old belief rooted in European colonial law that any land discovered by Christians could be claimed, regardless of who already lived there. This doctrine, incredibly, was cited in U.S. Supreme Court rulings as late as the 2000s. It's a reminder that much of the legal system around land ownership was built on deeply flawed and discriminatory foundations. Despite this history, Native nations have never stopped fighting to reclaim what was lost. In recent decades, some tribes have successfully bought back their land, piece by piece. Others have taken cases to the Supreme Court and won. Some are restoring traditional land stewardship practices, planting, burning, fishing, and hunting as their ancestors once did. Tonight, as your breathing slows and your mind begins to drift, imagine the land itself. Rolling hills, pine forests, red clay, grassland stretching under moonlight. The land remembers. It holds footprints and ashes, whispers of songs, and silent tears. Though the laws changed, the earth remains, and so do the people who walk it still. It's a strange and haunting truth. While European settlers saw forests and canyons as resources to tame or sell, Native peoples saw them as relatives. Mountains had spirits, rivers carried songs, certain caves were the wombs of creation. Entire landscapes were holy, living, breathing beings. And yet, over centuries, many of these sacred places were not just taken, but desecrated, turned into tourist traps, military zones, or mining sites. The sacred, over time, became scenery, or worse, spoil. One of the most painful examples lies in the heart of the Black Hills of South Dakota. Known to the Lakota as Paha Sapa, these hills are considered the center of the world, a place of origin, prophecy, and spiritual ceremony. But today, they're most famous for something else. Mount Rushmore, where the faces of 4 U.S. presidents are carved into a stolen mountain. The irony is stark. These presidents include Jefferson and Lincoln, men whose policies either paved the way for westward expansion or ordered violence against Native people. To the Lakota, it's not just a monument, it's a scar on a sacred body. And then there's Devil's Tower, also in Wyoming, known to the Lakota as Mato Tipala, or Bear Lodge. It's a massive rock formation that towers over the plains, featured in movies and hiking brochures. But for centuries, Native nations held vision quests and sun dances there. Today, climbers scale its face with ropes and spikes. During the month of June, when many tribes still hold ceremonies, tribal leaders politely ask climbers to pause. Some do, many don't. Stranger still is the history of cave rock in Nevada, a volcanic formation sacred to the Washoe people. They believe it's home to powerful spirits. But in the 20th century, the government blasted a highway tunnel through it. Later, rock climbers bolted metal anchors into its walls. Only after legal battles did the government begin restricting access to preserve its sanctity. The idea that a rock could be sacred puzzled many Americans. But for the Washoe, it wasn't just a rock, it was a relative. Military bases were often built directly on or near sacred sites. One chilling example is Yucca Mountain in Nevada, a site sacred to the Western Shoshone and Paiute people. It's believed to be a place of spiritual energy where the dead pass into the next world. But in the late 20th century, the U.S. government selected it as a potential site to bury nuclear waste. In other words, a mountain seen as a passage for souls was proposed as a dumping ground for radioactive material. Mining is another chapter in this grim story. In Arizona, Oak Flat, a sacred site for the Apache, sits atop a rich copper deposit. For generations, Apache families gathered there to pray, harvest acorns, and hold coming-of-age ceremonies. But in recent years, the U.S. government approved a land swap that could hand the site over to a foreign mining company. If the mine proceeds, Oak Flat could collapse into a crater the size of a city. The ceremony site would be gone, swallowed by profit. Even the Grand Canyon, one of the most visited national parks in the world, is deeply sacred to at least 11 native nations. The Havasupai, Hopi, Zuni, and others have stories tied to its cliffs and waters. But when the canyon became a tourist attraction in the early 20th century, native people were evicted from the land. Hotels, gift shops, and mule trails replaced ancient footpaths. Tourists snapped photos. Few knew they were walking through someone's cathedral. But perhaps one of the strangest desecrations happened not in the West, but in New York City. Inwood Hill Park, now a quiet place of trees and benches, was once a Lenape sacred site. In the 20th century, when the park was being developed, workers uncovered dozens of ancient native graves. Instead of preserving them, many remains were quietly boxed up and sent to museums, or reburied without ceremony. The ground still remembers, even if the city above has forgotten. And yet, even through all this, the sacred endures. Ceremonies continue, sometimes in secret. Songs are still sung to mountains. Prayers are whispered into canyon winds. Native activists, elders, and youth fight not just to protect sacred sites, but to restore the reverence they deserve. So as you rest tonight, imagine a quiet clearing at sunrise. A circle of elders, smoke rising from a small fire, a drumbeat in the distance. These are not just myths or stories, they are living traditions. The sacred wasn't destroyed, it was wounded. But it still breathes, just beneath the surface of the everyday world. Language is more than just words. It's the heartbeat of culture, the container of stories, songs, and wisdom passed down through generations. For Native American communities, language was a sacred gift. Every word was tied to the land, to ceremonies, to identity itself. But when European settlers arrived, they didn't just bring new languages. They brought the harsh desire to silence the old ones. One of the strangest and saddest realities is that before colonization, there were roughly 300 distinct native languages spoken across what is now the United States. Each language was a world in itself, with unique sounds, grammar, and stories. Some tribes had multiple dialects. For example, the Apache language family includes several distinct languages spoken hundreds of miles apart. The diversity was staggering, like a library with hundreds of rare, priceless books. But during and after the boarding school era, speaking these languages was forbidden. Teachers punished children for using their mother tongues. The goal was clear: force native children to learn English, and only English. Over time, this brutal policy created a silence where once there had been song. One peculiar and heartbreaking story comes from the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee developed their own written language in the early 19th century, thanks to Sequoyah, a remarkable silversmith who created a syllabary, a system of written characters representing sounds. This was one of the only native scripts in the world. It allowed the Cherokee to print newspapers, legal documents, and books in their own language, fostering a strong cultural identity. Yet even with this incredible innovation, Cherokee children in boarding schools were beaten for reading or writing in their own script. The language survived, but only barely. Today, it's taught again in schools and celebrated, but it was almost lost to a generation that was forbidden to speak it. The same story echoes throughout many other tribes: Lakota, Navajo, Ojibwe, and hundreds of others saw their languages pushed to the brink. In some cases, entire languages disappeared when the last fluent speaker died. Often an elder who never passed the language on to younger generations because of fear or shame. But there were some strange and unexpected ways native languages survived. In World War II, the Navajo code talkers used their language as an unbreakable code to help the US military. The Japanese never cracked it because the language was so complex and unfamiliar. This moment of survival became a source of pride and a symbol of cultural strength. Yet, it was also ironic. This secret weapon was born from a language once banned in schools. In addition to secret codes, many native communities preserved their languages through storytelling, ceremonies, and songs, passing words quietly from elder to child in homes and remote areas. Sometimes, language survival depended on simple acts of rebellion, whispering a prayer in Lakota, humming a lullaby in Mohawk, or telling a story in Yupik while hiding from prying ears. Today, hundreds of native languages are endangered, with only a handful of fluent speakers left. But the fight to revive them is alive and growing. Technology is helping. Some tribes have created apps, online classes, and video games to teach children their ancestral tongues. Others hold immersion schools, where children speak only their native language all day. It's a slow process, but every word learned is a victory. Because language is more than speech. It's a bridge to identity, history, and resilience. As you listen now, imagine the gentle hum of an ancient language, soft vowels rising like birdsong at dawn, words that describe not just things, but feelings and connections to animals, to stars, to the earth itself. Though many voices have been silenced, those whispers still linger in the wind, waiting to be heard again. Picking up where we left off, let's explore how language suppression affected not only words, but the very way Native Americans saw the world, and how, despite it all, they are reclaiming their voices today. One fascinating aspect of native languages is how deeply they connect people to nature and community. For example, many indigenous languages don't just have words for tree or river. They have multiple words that describe a tree's condition, the river's mood, or the time of year. The language paints a living picture of the environment, changing with the seasons and weather. When these languages disappear, a whole way of understanding the world slips away. In Navajo, for example, the word for life is connected to the concept of harmony with the universe. Losing the language means losing this beautiful worldview, which can't be fully captured in English. It's like trying to translate a song into silence. Suppression wasn't limited to schools. Laws banned native ceremonies and languages. From the late 1800s through much of the 20th century, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and other government bodies criminalized traditional cultural practices. This meant speaking your language in public, singing sacred songs, or performing dances could result in fines or jail time. This created fear and shame around native languages. Feelings passed from parents to children, making it even harder to keep languages alive. One unusual way native peoples kept their languages alive was through the use of hidden speakers. These were elders who spoke their native tongue only in private, carefully avoiding government agents or outsiders. They became the last guardians of words, stories, and prayers, passing them quietly to a trusted few. Imagine the weight of holding an entire culture in your memory, knowing you must keep it secret to survive. In recent decades, many tribes have launched incredible revitalization projects. The Cherokee Nation has a dedicated language program that broadcasts daily lessons on the radio. The Hawaiian language, once nearly extinct, is now spoken in schools and even in government meetings. Immersion schools where children live and learn in the language 24/7 have sprouted across the country. Technology plays a surprising role, too. Apps like Duolingo now offer courses in Navajo and Cherokee. Social media lets young people share songs, poems, and conversations in their languages, creating vibrant digital communities. Even video games have been developed that teach vocabulary and grammar while entertaining players. These efforts are more than education. They are acts of healing. Speaking one's language is a way of reclaiming identity, honoring ancestors, and connecting to the land. It's a quiet revolution, fought with syllables instead of swords. But challenges remain. Many elders who speak the languages fluently are very old. If they don't pass on their knowledge soon, some languages may vanish forever. Some tribal communities are small and scattered, making it hard to gather resources or teachers, and the pressure of English in schools, media, and jobs is still overwhelming. Despite these difficulties, hope shines brightly. Every new speaker is a seed planted in the soil of survival. Every story told, every song sung, is a thread woven back into the fabric of a living culture. So tonight, as your mind relaxes and your breath deepens, imagine a circle of voices rising in a language ancient as the stars. Hear the soft, flowing words that name the earth, the sky, the animals, and each other. Though the voices were quieted, they were never truly lost. Rest easy, knowing that with each breath, with each word spoken, the spirit of these languages and the people who speak them lives on, quietly strong and endlessly resilient. Imagine being forced to leave the land your ancestors have lived on for centuries, walking hundreds of miles through harsh weather with little food or shelter. This is the painful reality known as forced relocation, a tragic chapter in Native American history that changed countless lives and reshaped entire nations. One of the most infamous examples is the Trail of Tears. But forced removal was only part of a larger pattern of displacement. Before we get into the details, here's a strange fact. Many Native American tribes had extensive knowledge of their homelands, including natural remedies, seasonal cycles, and navigation by stars and rivers. Yet, when forced to move, they were often sent to unfamiliar and often harsh lands, far from the resources they depended on. It was like asking a sailor to cross an ocean blindfolded. The Trail of Tears refers mainly to the removal of the Cherokee Nation in the 1830s, but other tribes, including the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, were also forced to march westward. These tribes were part of the so-called 5 civilized tribes because they had adopted many European American customs, including farming, written laws, and schooling. Yet this did not protect them from removal. The U.S. government passed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson. The law aimed to open up native lands in the southeast for white settlers and cotton plantations. Many native people resisted, legally and physically. The Cherokee famously took their case all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled in their favor. But the ruling was ignored, and the military forced thousands to move. The journey itself was brutal. Thousands died from starvation, exposure, and disease. The route stretched over 1,000 miles, often through freezing winters and scorching summers. Many families walked barefoot. Some carried the sick or the very young on their backs. Estimates suggest that around 4,000 Cherokee people died during the forced march. An odd and lesser-known detail. During the removal, some soldiers and settlers left behind personal journals and letters describing the harsh conditions, but also moments of surprising kindness. In some cases, local townspeople secretly provided food or blankets to native groups passing through. These quiet acts of compassion often went unrecorded in official histories. Forced relocation didn't end with the Trail of Tears. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many smaller tribes were pushed off their lands and moved to reservations far away. Sometimes these moves were sudden, with little warning or preparation. Families lost crops, homes, and sacred sites. Imagine waking one morning to find signs on your land telling you it now belonged to someone else. The land given to tribes after removal was often far less fertile and less suitable for traditional ways of life. Many reservations were in arid deserts or poor soils where farming was difficult. This made survival even more precarious. Tribes had to adapt quickly or face starvation. Forced relocation also meant losing connections to ancestors' burial grounds, ceremonial sites, and sacred places. For many Native people, the land is not just property, it's a spiritual anchor. To be torn away was not only a physical loss, but a deep spiritual wound. Yet despite all this hardship, many tribes rebuilt their communities. They adapted farming techniques, raised livestock, and formed new social networks. They held onto languages, stories, and traditions, even in exile. The journey west became part of their identity, a painful memory, but also a testament to resilience. As you listen and begin to relax, picture a long caravan moving quietly through forests, plains, and rivers, carrying with it not just people, but a spirit determined to survive. The land changes, but the connection remains, etched in memory, song, and the steady heartbeat of those who walk it. Continuing from the painful journey of forced relocation, we can explore how the long aftermath of these removals shaped Native lives in surprising and difficult ways often overlooked in history books, but essential to understanding the full story. After reaching their new homes, many tribes faced the challenge of starting over on unfamiliar lands. Some of these territories were far from the fertile rivers and forests they once knew. For example, the Cherokee who were relocated to what is now Oklahoma found themselves in dry, sometimes harsh terrain. This wasn't just a change of scenery. It meant relearning how to live, hunt, and farm in a completely different environment. Interestingly, despite the hardship, the Cherokee and other tribes tried to maintain their governments and social structures. They set up schools, built churches, and even drafted constitutions. The Cherokee Nation created a written legal system modeled partly on the U.S. Constitution. This showed a deep determination to preserve their identity and governance, even in exile. But life on reservations was still filled with hardships. The government promised supplies and support that often never arrived. Food rations were sometimes spoiled or inadequate. Medical care was minimal, leading to outbreaks of diseases like smallpox, measles, and tuberculosis. The emotional toll of losing homes, relatives, and cultural sites added to physical suffering. One strange fact: Some tribes used secret routes and hidden paths to visit their old homelands. These return journeys were acts of resistance and healing, often done quietly or at great personal risk. Elders would share stories of these journeys, recounting how they slipped through forests and over rivers to touch the land of their ancestors. The psychological impact of forced relocation also included trauma passed down through generations. Many Native families today still speak of the sorrow and loss carried in stories from grandparents and great-grandparents. This intergenerational trauma is something many Native communities are actively working to understand and heal. Despite everything, resilience shone through. Tribes held on to their traditions, ceremonies, and languages, sometimes adapting them to new environments, sometimes fiercely protecting them from further harm. New stories were created that wove the experience of removal into the cultural fabric, honoring both loss and survival. Economic hardship on reservations led many Native people to move to cities in the mid-20th century in search of jobs and education. This migration created new challenges, but also new opportunities to share culture and advocate for rights. The urban Native experience added another layer to the complex story of survival and adaptation. It's also important to note that the trauma of forced relocation wasn't just historical. It echoes in ongoing struggles over land rights and sovereignty today. Many tribes continue to fight legal battles to reclaim lands or protect sacred sites from development. The legacy of forced removal remains a living part of their story. So as you let your thoughts drift this evening, imagine a slow-moving river. It carries stories of pain and hope, loss and resilience, flowing quietly through time. Forced relocation tried to uproot these stories, but they flow on, strong and enduring. Imagine living in a place where the land stretches wide and empty, but the resources are scarce. This is the reality for many Native American reservations today, a place of beauty and hardship, history and struggle. The reservation system, created through forced relocation and broken treaties, placed Native communities on parcels of land often far from their traditional territories, and with limited means to sustain themselves. One strange fact is that reservations vary enormously in size and landscape. Some are tiny plots, just a few hundred acres, while others are vast, spanning millions of acres across deserts, forests, and plains. The Navajo Nation, for example, covers over 27,000 square miles, larger than many U.S. states, while others, like the Ponca tribe of Nebraska, have much smaller reservations. The environment on many reservations presents challenges. Water shortages are common, especially in the Southwest. Some communities must drive miles to access clean water. Unemployment rates are often very high, sometimes exceeding 50%, leading to economic difficulties. These factors create a complex web of challenges for daily survival. Despite these hardships, reservation life is also a story of resilience and culture. Tribal governments manage their own schools, police, and social services, striving to provide for their people under difficult circumstances. Many reservations have community centers, health clinics, and cultural programs aimed at preserving languages and traditions. A lesser-known aspect is how some reservations have become centers for renewable energy projects. The vast open lands and abundant sunshine in places like the Navajo Nation have attracted solar and wind energy companies, providing jobs and revenue. This represents a hopeful connection between ancient lands and modern technology. However, health issues on reservations are a significant concern. Diabetes, heart disease, and substance abuse affect many native communities at higher rates than the general population. Access to health care can be limited, and mental health resources are often stretched thin. The legacy of trauma, poverty, and marginalization continues to impact overall well-being. Education on reservations also presents a complex picture. Tribal schools work hard to balance state standards with cultural teachings. There's a growing movement to incorporate native languages, history, and traditions into school curricula, helping young people connect to their heritage while preparing for the future. Yet, even with schools and services, infrastructure is often lacking. Many homes lack reliable electricity, plumbing, or internet access. Roads can be rough or unpaved. These basic needs, taken for granted in many places, are daily hurdles for reservation residents. Still, celebrations and ceremonies continue to thrive. Powwows, traditional dances, and festivals are vibrant expressions of culture and community. These gatherings bring people together, reinforcing identity and pride, and providing moments of joy amid struggles. Another surprising fact is how some reservations have become artistic hubs. Native artists work in traditional crafts like beadwork, pottery, and weaving, as well as contemporary media like film, music, and digital art. Their work is gaining national and international recognition, sharing stories and perspectives with the wider world. Reservation life, with all its contradictions, reminds us that Native peoples are neither relics of the past nor victims of circumstance. They are living, adapting communities with deep roots and vibrant futures. As you settle in and prepare for sleep, imagine a quiet evening on a reservation. The sun sets behind distant mesas. Children's laughter drifts from a schoolyard. A drumbeat pulses softly in the distance. This is a place where history and hope intertwine, quietly waiting for a new day. Continuing our journey through reservation life, it's important to understand how Native communities navigate the delicate balance between preserving traditions and adapting to modern challenges. This is a story of strength in the face of ongoing difficulties. A story that quietly unfolds every day. Reservations are often seen from the outside as isolated or forgotten places. But within them, there is a vibrant social and cultural life. Families gather for ceremonies, share meals, and pass down stories that connect past, present, and future. Elders teach younger generations not only language but values, respect for the land, and community responsibility. One surprising fact is that many reservations have developed their own economic enterprises to support their communities. Casinos, for example, have become a source of income for some tribes, funding schools, healthcare, and infrastructure projects. While not all tribes operate casinos, those that do have used this revenue to improve living conditions and create jobs. Yet, economic development is often complicated. Reservations can face legal hurdles, limited access to capital, and geographic isolation that make business growth difficult. Many residents still rely on subsistence hunting, fishing, and gathering, keeping alive ancient practices tied to the land. Environmental issues also play a major role. Some reservations sit atop valuable mineral deposits, leading to extraction industries that bring both jobs and environmental risks. Uranium mining on Navajo lands, for example, caused long-term health problems due to radiation exposure. Efforts to clean up and heal the land are ongoing, but the scars remain. Education remains a beacon of hope. More Native youth are attending colleges and universities, becoming leaders, artists, and advocates. Many return to their communities with new skills and a renewed commitment to serve. Tribal colleges and universities, established on or near reservations, provide culturally relevant education and play a key role in this renewal. Mental health and substance abuse continue to be serious concerns, but many tribes are developing programs rooted in traditional healing methods alongside modern therapies. Talking circles, sweat lodges, and ceremonies offer spiritual support, helping individuals and families heal from trauma. Technology is slowly bridging the gap. Some reservations are gaining better internet access, enabling telemedicine, online education, and connection to the wider world. This helps younger generations stay connected while preserving their cultural identity. Another lesser-known fact is the role of women in reservation communities. Women often serve as cultural bearers, educators, and leaders. Their work in revitalizing languages, arts, and governance is critical to the survival and growth of their nations. Despite the many challenges, reservation life is rich with hope and renewal. It's a life deeply connected to the land, shaped by history, and propelled by the determination to thrive. So tonight, as your body relaxes and your thoughts grow soft, picture a quiet reservation evening. Imagine a fire's glow, the gentle rhythms of a drum, the voices of a community coming together. Here, in this space between past and future, survival is a gentle, persistent heartbeat. As we reach the final part of our journey through the history of Native Americans, it is fitting to turn our attention toward the future. A future shaped by resilience, revival, and hope. Despite centuries of hardship and loss, Native peoples continue to rebuild, reconnect, and reclaim their stories and identities in powerful, inspiring ways. One striking and sometimes surprising fact is the growing movement of Native youth who are actively embracing their heritage. Across reservations, urban centers, and online communities, young people are learning their languages, reviving traditional crafts, and engaging with ceremonies that had been at risk of fading away. This renaissance is not only about preserving the past, but creating a vibrant cultural future. Another remarkable aspect of this revival is the role of technology and media. Native filmmakers, musicians, writers, and artists are gaining wider audiences, telling stories that challenge stereotypes and celebrate their culture's diversity and richness. Social media platforms serve as virtual powwows where ideas, language lessons, and celebrations are shared globally, connecting Native peoples across distances. Education remains a cornerstone of this revival. Many tribes have established or expanded tribal colleges and universities, creating spaces where Native knowledge and academic learning come together. These institutions focus on cultural preservation, language revitalization, environmental stewardship, and leadership development, empowering new generations to lead their communities with strength and vision. Land reclamation efforts are also an essential part of this forward movement. Tribes have successfully reclaimed thousands of acres of ancestral land through legal battles, purchases, and partnerships. Restoring these lands isn't just about geography. It's about restoring a spiritual and cultural connection that had been severed. Native managed lands often become sites for cultural ceremonies, sustainable agriculture, and environmental conservation. Health and wellness initiatives reflect this holistic vision. Many Native communities are blending traditional healing practices with modern medicine to address mental, physical, and spiritual health. Programs that incorporate storytelling, nature immersion, and ceremony alongside clinical care are gaining recognition for their effectiveness and cultural resonance. Political activism has also grown stronger, with Native leaders advocating for sovereignty, treaty rights, environmental protection, and social justice. Recent movements have brought greater awareness to Native issues nationwide and internationally, emphasizing the importance of listening to indigenous voices. Some tribes have turned to economic diversification beyond gaming, exploring opportunities in ecotourism, agriculture, renewable energy, and technology startups. These ventures offer new pathways for economic self-sufficiency while respecting cultural values and environmental stewardship. This blend of tradition and innovation reflects a dynamic, living culture, one that honors the wisdom of ancestors while embracing the possibilities of the present and future. The Native American story is not just about survival, but about thriving, growing, and inspiring. So, as you settle into rest, imagine the gentle rhythms of a drum calling across time, echoing ancient songs, shared stories, and new voices rising in harmony. Feel the strength of roots deep in the earth and branches reaching toward the sky, steady and growing. Tonight, as your mind drifts softly toward sleep, carry with you the quiet hope and enduring spirit of Native resilience and revival. The journey continues, ever forward. As we gently close this story of Native American history, marked by hardship but also profound resilience, it's comforting to remember that this is not merely a tale of the past. It is a living, breathing story unfolding today and tomorrow as Native peoples reclaim their voices, cultures, and futures with remarkable strength and grace. Across the country and around the world, Native communities are leading cultural, political, and environmental movements that inspire change and healing. One beautiful fact is that many Native languages, once thought endangered or lost, are experiencing revival. Language immersion schools teach children their ancestral tongues, and digital apps now help preserve and spread these languages beyond reservation borders. This revival isn't only about language or tradition, it's also about redefining identity on Native terms. Many young Native artists, activists, and scholars are challenging stereotypes, sharing nuanced stories, and expressing the diversity of their experiences through film, music, literature, and visual arts. Their work invites others to listen deeply and learn new perspectives. Environmental stewardship remains central to Native futures. Many tribes manage their lands with a focus on sustainability, conservation, and respect for nature's balance. Indigenous knowledge systems offer valuable lessons for addressing climate change and environmental degradation, emphasizing harmony between humans and the earth. At the same time, Native-led political activism continues to grow, advocating for sovereignty, treaty rights, and justice. From grassroots organizing to participation in national governments, Native voices are shaping policies and conversations, demanding respect and recognition. Economically, many tribes are innovating beyond casinos, investing in renewable energy, technology, agriculture, and cultural tourism. These ventures create jobs and build self-sufficiency while honoring cultural values and protecting the environment. The fusion of tradition and innovation defines the future many Native communities envision. Health and wellness programs increasingly incorporate traditional healing alongside modern medicine, recognizing the importance of spiritual, mental, and physical balance. Cultural ceremonies, storytelling, and connection to the land are vital components of this holistic approach. The power of community remains a foundation. Family, elders, and cultural gatherings continue to nurture identity and strength. Powwows, festivals, and ceremonies are vibrant celebrations of heritage, bringing people together in joy and solidarity. As you listen, picture a vast landscape under a starry sky where the past and future meet. Imagine the soft drum beats and the quiet voices of ancestors mingling with new songs of hope. Feel the gentle strength of a people deeply rooted in their land and culture, growing steadily into the future. Let this peaceful vision lull you toward rest, carrying the enduring spirit of Native resilience and revival into your dreams. The story is far from over. It is a continuous journey of healing, strength, and renewal. As our long journey through the history of Native Americans draws to a close, it's important to take a moment to breathe deeply and reflect. We have traveled through centuries of struggle, loss, and upheaval, but also through remarkable strength, adaptation, and renewal. This story, filled with hardship, is also one of unyielding spirit and enduring hope, a testament to the resilience of Native peoples and cultures. History often reduces Native Americans to mere footnotes or tragic chapters, but what we've explored together reveals a much richer, deeper story. It's a story about people who lived closely with the land, who cultivated vibrant cultures and complex societies, and who, despite unimaginable challenges, continue to thrive today. Their history is not confined to the past. It pulses with life in the present and stretches with promise into the future. Think back to the early days, when Native peoples thrived in diverse environments across this continent. They adapted ingeniously to the rhythms of nature, developing sophisticated knowledge about plants, animals, seasons, and stars. Their cultures expressed profound spiritual connections to the earth, guiding their ways of life and community. Even in moments of hardship, their traditions and values shaped daily life, fostering a sense of belonging and purpose. Yet, as we know, life for Native Americans was brutally disrupted by the arrival of Europeans. Colonization brought disease, warfare, and displacement. Entire populations were decimated by illnesses unknown to them, and sacred lands were stolen. The imposition of foreign laws and systems sought to erase indigenous identities. Through it all, Native peoples resisted, sometimes openly in battle, sometimes through cultural persistence and quiet resilience. One of the darkest chapters was forced relocation, epitomized by the Trail of Tears. Thousands of Native men, women, and children were forced to leave their ancestral homes, enduring treacherous journeys marked by hunger, exposure, and grief. But even this painful ordeal became part of a broader narrative of survival and adaptation. Tribes rebuilt their communities on new lands, holding on to language, customs, and governance in exile. Life on reservations brought a new set of challenges: economic hardship, environmental difficulties, and struggles with health and education. Yet these places also became centers of cultural revival and political assertion. Today, Reservations are vibrant communities where traditions live alongside innovation. They are places of ceremony and celebration, but also sites of ongoing struggle and determination. The resilience of Native peoples is perhaps the most inspiring takeaway from this history. Across generations, they have preserved languages, revived ceremonies, and reasserted sovereignty. Young Native Americans are embracing their heritage with pride, becoming artists, leaders, and activists who reshape how the world sees indigenous cultures. Modern Native communities engage in groundbreaking work, reclaiming lands, protecting the environment, developing new economies, and healing historical wounds with holistic approaches to health and wellness. Their voices are louder and stronger than ever, contributing valuable perspectives to global conversations about justice, sustainability, and cultural diversity. As we end this series, it's important to remember that Native American history is not a closed book, but a living, evolving story. It's a story of enduring connection to the land and each other, of past trauma and future hope. It's a reminder that history is made not only by the mighty, but also by the quiet strength of those who carry forward traditions and build new paths. So as you prepare to rest, carry with you a deep respect and gentle understanding for the lives and legacies we've explored. Let the slow rhythms of this story soothe your mind, reminding you that even through darkness, resilience and renewal are possible. May this reflection inspire empathy, curiosity, and appreciation for the rich cultures that continue to shape our world. Thank you for joining this journey. A slow, thoughtful walk through history to help you unwind and fall asleep. May your dreams be peaceful and your heart open to the quiet strength that comes from understanding. Good night, and until next time.